and I was telling sir, it was an amazing discussion. So we are live now. We are live, and I would like to welcome all the participants on this beautiful webinar today. We will wait for another minute for a majority of participants to join. And I think till then we can just have a informal discussion. Vivek would love to understand what's happening in Chandigarh, which is my usual question. How is everyone feeling? So how is COVID and Punjab dealing? Congratulations, sir. You've done so well on COVID. But we'd love to hear, at least for a few minutes, a couple of minutes, we can hear from you. What is Punjab doing on COVID? How have you managed to do such an amazing task, sir?
I think Punjab, under the leadership of the dynamic Chief Minister, Captain Amrinder Singh, I think we were ahead of the curve, and in terms of imposing the lockdown, in terms of imposing the curfew, and of course there were challenges in terms of the large proportion of NRIs who were here, locating them and then tracing them. Then of course we had the Tablighi peak, and then you had the people coming back from Nanded and the quota students and so on and so forth. But the whole idea has been that the entire state government and state machinery has been working very proactively. And having said that, as of today, we cannot rest on our past laurels. Caution is the byline or the buzzword. We may not be talking in terms of paranoia, but definitely caution is the word. We are getting 250 cases approximately a day, sometimes can spike up to 300. And if you take the average period of about 2 weeks for recovery, that is well within the manageable limits of the health system. But I think the overall scenario is that while the state and the state agencies are fully equipped and keen and hands-on, people at large must also realize that this is not really almost a kind of, I won't say a joke, but it is not something which needs to be taken non-seriously. So that is what it is, and we are constantly trying to learn new lessons so that we are able to contain the contagion, so to say.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for a wonderful job that Punjab has done. To all the participants today, welcome to the masterclass on UPSC Aspirant to Achiever. I'm honored and delighted to have our speaker for the day today, Mr. KBS Sidhu. Many of us already know him. He is the Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Punjab, and he is one of the most illustrious IAS officers of India, a 1984 batch IAS officer. I also have with me Mr. Vivek Atre, ex-IAS, motivational speaker, TEDx speaker, who will be co-hosting the show along with me. My name is Atul Khosla. I am the founder and Pro-Vice Chancellor of Shoolini University. And together we'll be probing and discussing with Mr. Sidhu about his career at UPSC. Our objective today would be to inspire all of you to understand from him, what does life of an IAS officer look like, apart from all the wonderful roses that we think it exists? So what are the challenges that are there? What are the excitements that are there? We'd love to hear your story, sir. And of course, we'd love to hear some thoughts on how should young aspirants think about the IAS and the IPS. So before we start, actually, we'll request Vivek to formally introduce Mr. Sidhu, and we'll then take it over into a Q&A. I'll also request the participants to please ask questions. Mr. Sidhu, I'm sure, will be delighted to answer all the questions that you have. Vivek, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Atul Khosla, and a warm welcome to Mr. KBS Sidhu, sir, the Special Chief Secretary, Government of Punjab, and a very warm human being, very pleasant and nice company. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you. Most welcome to this show.
It's my privilege to be here, and thanks for having me here.
Sir, Mr. Sidhu, I must tell all the viewers, and already I can see some comments of viewers coming in. It is a pleasure to have him, not only because he's a senior officer, but also because he is a man of many talents and many interests, has worked in various departments and has done extremely well, not only in the state government, but also in the government of India. where he also represented India at the United Nations and other fora in international sessions. And he has written extensively on governance. He also is a very good speaker and orator. And I came into contact a number of times during my own career with Mr. Sidhu. And he also asked me to speak once on, I think it was on gender sensitivity issues when Sir was heading the Women and Child Care Department in Government of Punjab. And we spoke together. It was a pleasure that day also. And Mr. Sidhu has also spoken at the Vivek IAS Career Academy premises, where it was a pleasure to welcome him. And he was physically present at our academy. Of course, that day there were about 70 or 80 students. Today, we are reaching out through this understanding with Shoolini University and through the efforts of Shoolini University to hundreds of candidates all across the land and many states. It's wonderful that these young aspirants can join in and listen to such experience, such wisdom and guidance from the leading lights of the civil services. And Mr. Sidhu is probably going to be one of the most senior officers we could ever invite to this program or this session. And he has an ear to the ground, and yet he is able to understand the macro level picture of governance and administration so well. Sir, over to you to just probably Atul will again come in with one word. And then over to you, sir, to give us an overview, and then perhaps later we'll have an interaction.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vivek. I have to tell all the students here, we normally associate, power with IS officers and IPS officers, especially when they're as senior as Sidhu sir. So I spent half an hour talking to Mr. Sidhu yesterday, and I have to make you blush, sir, because I was so pleasantly surprised. You are so humble and you're so senior. And I think that's the indication of someone who is successful and who is really, reaching pinnacles of success. So we are delighted to have you, sir, and we are delighted to partner with Vivek Career Academy on this effort. The UPSC is one of the best platforms for careers in India. My mother sometimes gets very upset, Mr. Sidhu. She wanted me to be an IS officer, and my roommate actually ended up topping the UPSC from IIT Kanpur, Nikunj Srivastav. So I know if she's watching this, she will come back and tell me that, my nickname is Shishu. She'll say, Shishu, why didn't you do the IS? But that's a separate story. We'd love to hear your journey, sir. You're an engineer. You went to Thapar. So tell us a bit about your journey. How did you start to think about the civil services? What was your motivation? And tell us a bit about your journey from your school days to engineering to UPSC and your postings across the UPSC. We'd love to hear that, sir. Over to you, Mr. Sidhu.
Thank you for this introduction. I don't really know whether I deserve all the superlatives that have been used. But having said that, I have been basically a Patiala boy, which even by today's standards can be described as a small town, quote unquote. So I went to what they call as a prestigious institution, the Yadavindra Public School, right from class 1 to class 10. And thereafter, one was inclined towards mathematics, one was inclined towards engineering, and therefore one landed up in the local Thapar Institute of Engineering and Technology, which at that time was an affiliated college with Punjab University Patiala, and got into electronics and telecommunication. My father was a state civil services officer, and he unfortunately expired at a very young age of 40 in 1972, and I was barely 10, I along with my sister. So something behind which my mother had been inculcating, and she's still alive and living with us, and she was a source of inspiration that, okay, you do follow your dreams insofar as whatever discipline you want to specialize in, but keep this option open in terms of the civil services. So from class 10th and prep and pre-engineering in the local Modi college, topping the university on both occasions. I landed up in Thapar College because of family circumstances. I had offers from IITs, from BITS Pilani and so on, including PAC Chandigarh, but opted to stay in Patiala and completed my degree. Now, as a part of the school, we had been participating in quiz competitions, declamations, debates, and ICSE, history, geography, social studies are something which automatically prepare you for the civil service. But the small anecdote, or really where one branched off into civil services proper, was that one fine winter afternoon, we were sitting and munching samosas outside the canteen, and one gentleman, he brought out the employment news, which was a special edition for the civil services examination. So it was something like a December 1982 or January 83. And to apply for the preliminary examination, you didn't even require your matriculation certificate to be put or a degree. In fact, they said that if you're likely to get your degree by next June, you're eligible to apply. So we simply filled in the form and bought the postal orders from the post office there, and got the registry done. And so one got into final year, and just towards the final semester, one had the preliminary examination, which I cleared. Simultaneously, I was very keen on pursuing higher engineering. So it was the first year of GATE, the Graduate Aptitude Test in Engineering, which I had taken and got a very high percentile. And while all my mentors, teachers, and gurus in engineering college, they were saying that if you are really serious about taking the civil service examination, why don't you stay here, teach, and have an academic atmosphere? You're at your home, you got the library facilities. We'll give you a light type of academic code and load, and then you go ahead and prepare. But I was keen, and so I got into computer science in Tech in IT Delhi. But within a couple of days, I realized, and this is, I think, one moral that you need to decide. Decisions have to be taken, and those are irreversible decisions. And without consulting anyone, it was not the day and age where you would pick up a phone and consult your mother or your friends. So having deposited my fees, etc., I was back to Patiala and back to my alma mater in Thapar Engineering College. They, of course, had recruited some other people, including my batchmates. They said, but Karanbir, if you are here, I think we'll have an ad hoc spot for you and want you to teach and at the same time take the examination. So that is really how it all began. I taught 2 semesters there in Thapar Engineering College, and interestingly, I was teaching the final year. So those students who were my friends, just 1 year my junior, teaching something like microwave techniques, in the next year teaching something like material science, and simultaneously taking the examination with hardcore technical subjects, electrical engineering and physics. And electrical engineering combined with light currents is basically electronics. So one would go from Patiala to Chandigarh, take the exam, come back, also teach. And I've taken the engineering services examination also. And that, of course, the result came much later. I was selected in that with a topmost position. But here, then, when the results came, the interview went off very well. So the results of the IS came towards the end of May 1984. So those were troubled days for Punjab. And when the results came, I was expecting a reasonably good result, but I got All India position number 2, which was really not something which was I was expecting in the first attempt. But that is what it was. Then, of course, in the first week of June, Blue Star operation happened, very unfortunate event. Punjab was under a virtual curfew for a couple of weeks. And at the same time, we were expected to join Mussoorie Academy, and which we finally did. So that was a journey. I was a person aspiring to be an engineer, trying to wed physics and electronics engineering and solving Maxwell's equations and getting to research within India or abroad. But somewhere down the line, decisions had to be taken. Decisions are like, incisions. They hurt, but ultimately, if you're clear about your decisions, the hurt is momentary and ultimately you heal. And they also have got to be precise. You need to sooner or later decide what you really want to do with your life in a particular point of time. You cannot be doing too many things which pull you in different directions. And then, of course, one was in the IAS and got Punjab cadre, was there in the academy. So before really I allow you to intervene and ask, and before I digress into my career trajectory, let me tell you one thing, that having topped on All India #2, I still had, when I was going to join at Mussoorie Academy, what people would call an imposter complex. KG, I am really a big mistake of the UPSC. How can a small town person who really hasn't read the Constitution of India and hasn't read those big books on economy, only knows a little bit about engineering and your current affairs and so on, that I am really going to be lost in intellectual and academic giants who would be there. But I think, and all humility I say, that when you reach there, after a filtration of a national examination, unlike make it into the services, if those are some intellectual giants who are coming out of no place, the people like you and me. And so you need to have self-confidence, tempered of course with humility and focus and concentration. And there is no reason why any right thinking young man or woman, student with proper guidance is not able to ace the civil services examination.
Fantastic. When you're talking about your small town story, Mr. Sidhu, it reminds me, of course, I took a very different path, but I grew up in Solan, and I remember when I joined McKinsey, I was an odd man out because I was not part of the gang students who came from the big cities. So I can understand how you felt in the Mussoorie Academy. But tell us some more about that, sir. Tell us a bit about the Mussoorie Academy. I've heard it's absolutely phenomenal. The time that you spend in the Mussoorie Academy is absolutely worth the effort of getting into the UPSC, apart from, of course, the career. Would love to hear your experiences in the academy.
I think something which I would like to tell every IAS aspirant is that generally the feeling is that you crack the civil service examination and you really scaled the Mount Everest and you have arrived, so to say. And at best, it is only the end of the beginning. In fact, the journey commences from there. It is the base camp. And it is not a cushy job that now you're into the IAS or the civil services. Now you have a perpetual paid holiday, which Government of India or the state government is going to pay for, or the people of India are going to pay for, and for you it's going to be power and prestige. It's really the beginning, and you realize what an immense nation this is, the immensity and enormity of the problems, diversity, and the people from all over the country, the various other services that are there. So the foundation course, which begins from August till December, comprises not only the IAS and the IPS, there are also foreign service, forest service, income tax, customs, a whole medley and kind of conglomeration of services, and you interact with them and you learn a lot from each other. And more importantly, people skills. So suddenly it's not as if the batch topper would be the most popular person. It is how you get along with people, how you interact, and what is there beyond your civil services rank. So that's important. And then, of course, there are trekking expedition, village visits, group studies, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you are preparing yourself, and that is what this foundation course is. But it is just the beginning. It is not as if now the paid holiday in the Sylvan surroundings of Missouri has begun, and it is a tough job. And if you have not studied law, if you have not studied economics and so on, you got to try and hard to grasp the concepts there, because it's a great leveler, and the concepts which are going to be ultimately used as a field officer and later in the policy level, that is the time for you to actually catch on to those. And then, of course, you got after that the various services, they kind of go to their respective institutions, the IPS people to Nagpur, the Hyderabad income tax people to Nagpur, and so on. Whereas the IS folks, they stick around for Bharat Darshan, and then their phase 1 of training. And then, of course, you come back to your state of allocation for 1 year, which includes institutional portion and field and so on. And it is after 2 years of rigorous training that you actually get the first post of sub-divisional magistrate. And by that time, you think that you are adequately prepared. But I'll, within 30 seconds, just tell a small anecdote that I thought I had mastered 107 section of Code of Criminal Procedure, preventive, and so on. But the very first day, the reader said, "Ji, multum pesh hoya, janab ode kol zabanti ta hai nahi, muchalke te chhad diye." And there were 3 key words which I didn't understand, and that is when I realized that the learning has to go on, and it really went on, and one has trudged through the career 1984 till now, 36, 37 years. So that's the type of journey it has been.
So have there been moments in your life where you felt very excited, that particular 2 or 3 years of posting, Mr. Sidhu, that you think was absolutely path-breaking, you were able to give back, or very exciting times? We'd love to hear those. I mean, of course, most of the times would have been exciting, but are there those very exceptional moments that you still remember?
I think if you ask any IS officer, and Mr. Atre has also been a deputy commissioner in Panchkula and elsewhere also. So I was posted as additional deputy commissioner in 1990 in Amritsar. And for 2 years, I was there looking after the developmental aspects. And those were troubled times. We were under president's rule. The governors were changing after every 6 months. And then, of course, you had the 1991 election, which was aborted. And Taran, which is now a separate district, was part and parcel of Amritsar at that time. So one was coordinating on the developmental side. So in February 92, when you had the elections and Sardar Byan Singh became the chief minister, so that was an election which was held under really the shadow of the barrel of the gun, because terrorist organizations, they had called for a boycott. Not more than 10% of popular vote was cast. And in any case, the Byan Singh government came. I was the additional deputy commissioner there. And before that, it had been president rule, except a small stint of Surjit Singh Barnala government while I was STM for about a few months. So I was kind of keen to be back into, say, a Patiala or a Ludhiana or a Sangrur. And that is how I accordingly requested the chief secretary. But he said, KBS, I didn't know that you know the chief minister personally. I said, sir, I really don't know. He said, your work as sub-divisional magistrate at Samrala, and Sardar Byan Singh comes from the Daraha area, which is not too far. And he has said that now we are looking for a change in Amritsar. The incumbent there has been for 5 years. So now democracy has to be restored. So what do you suggest about KBS Sidhu, who's in any case, sitting as ADC development at Amritsar itself? So he has an exposure. So I was very apprehensive, not only because the situation was such, but also because I really thought that it would require a larger than life personality to head a district like Amritsar, where you had an IG border range, a DIG border range, and you had 3 police districts, and you were to interact with all of those, and you had US senators and the Speaker of the House of Commons and the UN delegations coming to study the human rights issues, and then whole issue of the Samjhauta Express and so on and so forth. And not to mention the I wouldn't say the politics, the issues surrounding the Golden Temple and the SGPC, and of course, all looming under terrorism. But be that as it may, I was posted there, and I continued there for over 4 years. And luckily, fortunately, it was something which marked the transition of normalcy. There were elections, the Panchayat elections, the Panchayat Samiti elections, the local bodies elections, and ultimately everything trudged towards normalcy. And I was privileged to be associated with the initiation at that time of the Golden Temple beautification project, which was originally conceived as a security belt around the Golden Temple in 1988 after the Operation Black Thunder, which was a successful and a kind of a bloodless operation. But we kind of converted and were able to convince the popular comment and also talk to the SGPC authorities that this should be not just a security belt, it should be seen as a kind of a second Prakarma. So those type of things, then handling hijackings within a single calendar month and various other initiatives. So I would really put, my stint as Deputy Commissioner as something which you were able to reach out to the people, have impact. And apart from that, I think as Chief Administrator of the Punjab Urban Development Authority, which was one authority at that time instead of the various split up authorities, now we were able to do a lot of good work in Mohali, also generate funds to build infrastructure in other cities, including what are called as district administrative complexes, including at Patiala, Bathinda, Moga, Hoshiarpur, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, I think it is the impact on the ground and impact on the lives of the people that really makes the difference and makes you look back as an achievement. The various projects which you may have cleared or policies which you may have framed, which ultimately did not take off for whatever reason. I mean, you can justify, my policy was very good, the implementation was poor, I didn't get the support of the finance department or the top political executive and so on. But the proof of the pudding is in eating it. What ultimately has impact on the lives of the people in a positive sense, that is what you ultimately look back on. So it is not only just implementation as in a technical implementation, it is the impact, whether the intended positive consequences had that impact on the large populace for whom that was meant. Sometimes you get credit for the things you have not done. Sometimes you get flack for what you thought made you deserve a Padma Shri, but that is part of life and not only in IAS, and you got to take that in your stride.
So, you chose Punjab cadre, Mr. Sidhu. I think lots of questions come up from aspirants. How does the selection of the state happen? How do you become either Punjab cadre or some other state cadre? So what's the process for that? And if not Punjab, which other state would you have wanted to serve?
You see, the allocation policy has changed. At least during my stint in service, I've seen it changing. This is the third type of a process right now, which is prevailing. So I'll first go with the policy that was obtaining when I joined service. All that you could do is give preferences within zones. So North Zone, you say Punjab and Haryana, then you have to go to the other zone. You can't say third preference is Himachal. Then you say West Zone, okay, Maharashtra, Gujarat, or a Bihar or a UP, and so on and so forth. So you would be allotted within that order. But the caveat was that only 1/3 of the seats were reserved for the insiders, that is the people having domicile of the home state, and 2/3 would come from outside. So what happened therein was that if you're high enough in the merit, and there are posts for insiders, and that insider post is not subject to reservation, you could land up in your home cadre. Otherwise, next to home cadre, next zone, and so on and so forth. And finally, if you're at the tail of the list, pardon my saying so, the not so glamorous cadres of Northeast, people would land up there. Then, of course, sometime down the line, the policy came that, this is not really showing the All India character of the service. Okay, if you're good enough, you get your home cadre. Otherwise, you get into a random lottery. So that process was, I think, obtaining for almost a decade, where we have had, IS toppers from the state of Punjab who did not get Punjab because that seat was perhaps not for an open candidate. And in the random lottery, they landed up into Assam, Meghalaya, or Nagaland, or Mizoram, or whatever. Now I think we've gotten back to almost like the counseling in engineering colleges, that, okay, you give your choices and you start merit-wise, subject to reservation, and wherever you land, so be it. So what's now happening is that you have a fair chance of getting your, if not first, second, third preference. And small states like Punjab, Haryana, Himachal, you would reciprocally be situated within Punjab, Haryana, Himachal. So the contra argument now is that where is the All India character? I mean, we have some very good officers from Andhra Pradesh who are in Punjab cadre, and they've added a lot of value and given us perspectives, and also bringing success stories from their colleagues in those states. So it's all a debatable issue. Ultimately, the people who landed more by accident and then by design in Maharashtra, I think, are perhaps much happier than people who may have landed up in some other state close to Punjab. So that is, of course, there's a bit of destiny in that also, and also making the best of where you land. I mean, it's, I often like to say this, it's not about what type of cards you are dealt with by life. It's how you play the game is also far more important. And so irrespective of the cadre you are, irrespective of the deputy commissioner of which district you are, I think if you want to make an impact, that much of elbow space this service does allow, as long as you don't have your personal agendas which you're trying to slip in. And you can achieve a lot, and the people will remember you, people as well as the employees of the department, as well as the general collective memory. And that's what my belief is.
Wow, I'm sure, I'm going to get a scolding from my mother, Vivek. She's going to tell me why I never tried for the IS. At least I could have tried. But Vivek, you have a few questions.
I was not able to convince either of my two sons to get into. I just wanted to answer your mother's question. I couldn't convince either of my two sons. They were both brilliant in studies to take the civil service examination. My wife, she's an IRS officer of the 87 batch in the rank of chief commissioner. So their perspective is that we've seen you and mom, and okay, you've done what you wanted to do, but this is what we want to do. So I think it's all a question of time and timing, and also a bit of destiny and where you want, preferences, the undercurrent at that particular time, and all about decisions.
So true. I sometimes wonder how my career has shaped, Vivek. If it hadn't gone the way it did, probably I wouldn't have been sitting where I am at Shoolini. So, so happy now. So, but, you spoke about your wife.
I'm just
I'm curious.
Steve Jobs has written about this connecting the dots.
Connecting the dots.
He was, of course, great connecting the dots, and he was influenced by the Indian spiritual gurus. And he said, if you see the dots in the sequence in which they happen, there's apparently no connection. But if you connect them backwards, you say, okay, if I had not missed that train, I wouldn't have gone for this interview. If I had not left my job in Switzerland, I wouldn't have come here. Had I not quit IIT Delhi and quit my course, I would have done this. So there is, I think, a divinity, so to say, to quote Shakespeare, which shapes our ends.
Absolutely.
And the whole idea is to go with that flow and to leverage upon that. Otherwise, people say that, it's only dead fish go with the flow. So that's not the idea. But the general trend is there. But you can take a contrarian view, but you should be very sure what you want, and there should be no half-heartedness. And if you want to take the civil service examination, then please do take. Not that you're trying to convince your parents कि जी चंडीगढ़ में बैठे हैं बेटा वहाँ civil services की तैयारी कर रहा है, and you waste a couple of years and then you're back to whatever you want to do. That should not be attitude. I mean, if you really want to go ahead, then that focus and concentration has to be there in 100% dedication.
And that's so true for everything in life. So, before Vivek gets into a couple of questions that he's been curious on asking you, I'm very curious about how you met your wife. Did you meet her at the academy, or you met her during a service?
The answer is no. So I was, 22, 23 when I entered service. I had an elder sister who got into the state civil services. So it was that, both my mother and I, we were saying that, we got to marry off our sister first. But somehow, nothing was getting clinched, and she had her own, value system and ideas of the type of man she's going to marry. So ultimately, got into service in 1984, and it was in 1989 or so that, UPSC results came, and my mother, she had a cousin in Delhi who said, this is the Punjabi or the Sikh looking names, can you get their addresses? So they gave 2 or 3 addresses, and my mom actually wrote on a postcard to my father-in-law, who was then the army. And then, of course, yes, no, no, come, go. So ultimately, it was an arranged marriage, and I think we are both happy with it. But there was, it was not, so to say, a love marriage. The love blossomed afterwards, if I may say so.
Well, love is more important. How it blossoms is not. Vivek, over to you. I'm sure you have lots of questions.
Thank you. What an engrossing discussion is going on. I was listening very carefully, sir. And I agree with you and Atul. Love, actually, in India, you get married first and fall in love later, normally. Unless you have what is called a love marriage. And some of us have had that also. But, sir, your experience and your widespread knowledge...
Could you repeat the question? I don't know whether my internet connection is poor, or somehow the
No, sir. Can you hear me now, sir? Can you hear me, sir?
I think you're having a problem. Okay, go ahead, Vivek.
Yes, sir. No, I wasn't asking a question yet, sir. I was just making a comment on love marriages. And now I'm going to ask the question, sir. Sir, as you know, a lot has changed in service since you joined. I joined many years ago as well and left. You are one of the officers who was adapted so well to technology. And has it been just a natural adaptation because you're an engineer? Many people find it very difficult to become tech savvy in the service. They have to depend on a lot of others. But you have not found it difficult. How has it been so easy for you, sir?
You see, having a basic degree in engineering did help. But I can say one thing that, technology is the necessary but not the sufficient condition to be a successful civil servant these days. If you think that you're a tech whiz kid and, I'm able to put an app here and, share my screen and, put on a 3D type of animated type of thing for the chief minister to see, ultimately the substance and content has to be there. The technology will provide you a means to either communicate or to present or to solve and process data and so on and so forth, which manually would take a lot of time. It could not be accurate. But having said that, technology as it exists today and as our systems exist in the civil services is an aid, ultimately, to be able to frame policies which are people friendly, policies which are not to be seen in a utopian domain, which cannot be implemented practically, irrespective of the type of technology which you have at your disposal. So I think a balance between the technical quotient and a kind of a rustic native quotient would vet together. So now technology is here to stay. It's of course an individual preference. Some people would want their technical assistant to do the job. I think it's much faster if you're able to do it. It's so simple now. So I remember when the NIC was set up in as a pilot project in 1988, I was in Patiala. So at that time, the government of India was putting the entire thing in connectivity through the NIC net and dish antennas was coming up. And some of our officers were saying that who the hell is this district informating officers? Why is he coming and sitting here and getting a room next to the additional DC? But I was able to convince my collector, my deputy commissioner, that these are the people who need to be here, and this is something which we have to really do it. And he said, then you're a tech chap, and you also know about the land revenue, and you are the district informatic officer. Let us not wait for software packages to come from top. Why don't you prepare something? So the revenue officers meeting agenda we computerized with a D-base or a Fox Pro, I forget. And we called it Lambardar, which is the village headman. It was an acronym for Land Administration's Machine-Based Review of Dues and Recovery. And one thing which we found that some of the smart Alex were really in the statements, the closing statement of balance in a particular head, इतने लाख की recovery इब्तकाबी में है, तो the opening balance would be, just made a fraction of it. But here our system was picking up the opening balance from the closing, and we were able to inject a lot of efficiency. But in summary, technology, communications, data processing, the way we are conversing with each other, very fine. But ultimately, those are almost taken as granted. The human quotient, the emotional intelligence, and to be able to communicate, not only communicate, they interpret the same thing to different stakeholders. How you would speak in a press conference would be different. How you sell the same idea to Government of India at Delhi would be different. How you speak in your cabinet meeting would be different. I'm not saying you tell lies, but it's how you interpret and highlight to those particular set of stakeholders what they want or what they are looking for. And that, I think, is a very key role for a civil servant.
I totally agree, sir. In fact, that word you took out of my mouth was emotional intelligence. My second question is on that. Just one more question I have, and this will help aspirants who are watching also. A mathematics topper can theoretically clear the civil services exam, do very well, and in a 25-minute or 35-minute personality test or interview does reasonably well and gets into the IAS. Let's say the emotional intelligence of that mathematics topper may or may not be high. We have no system as yet of really evaluating, whereas the army does. The defense services take a week to analyze the personality, the emotional intelligence of a person before recruiting. Perhaps that part needs to be incorporated in the process, because ultimately it is about what you said. The reader, the numberdar, the 107 wala Muslim, they are in front of you, and that mathematics of your whatever has no value over there. So that part we need to probably train our civil servants a bit better and even test them before they enter. Your views on that?
I do. There are two views on that. Firstly, number one, emotional intelligence is very important anywhere in life. I'm not necessarily just in the IS or the civil services. You could be running an educational institution, you own enterprise, or you could be even in political leadership. Emotional intelligence is nothing but being able to get along with people and softening the edges and not rasping or rubbing the people the wrong way, which is required, I think, in any walk of life. Now, whether we should, in the selection process of the IAS, try to sift out candidates who do not, in the opinion of the expert panel, have the requisite EQ. Now, that is the debatable issue. Right now, something which is very positive in the sense of the UPSC examination, the whole system, is that it is a merit-driven system. It's a kind of a transparent system. There have been no allegations whatsoever regarding favoritism or the system being tweaked here and there. So once you get something like a subjective type of thing like this, immediately the questions would be raised whether, this was a person who was a topper getting this thing, but then he was, cut out for, crossed out on account of an EQ that he perhaps didn't have. The other thing is that, like all other qualities, human beings, the DNA cannot be changed, but one can definitely learn things. For instance, leadership qualities. It is not necessarily that, every person is born a leader. Like Shakespeare said, some people have greatness thrust upon them. Some people are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. Similarly, like leadership can be thrust upon you. You're thrown into a situation, you have to take a decision. Similarly, emotional intelligence also something you learn. I mean, you burn your fingers once or twice, and then you sit and ponder and say, hey, where did I go wrong? Or what's that person got extra which I don't have to handle a particular situation? So yes and no, emotional intelligence is important in every walk of life, including in civil service. But whether you do it at the pre-qualification induction stage or kind of build and evolve as a part of training and mentoring through the civil service, that would be the core and key issue.
Well, I think we can take some questions from the audience.
So, audience questions a lot around, how should I prepare for the civil services? And I think Sidhu sir did say that, focus on it. But you meet so many young officers, Mr. Sidhu, and I'm sure pretty much every year you meet a new set of young officers. Especially at the time of the interview, there's one set of questions which are coming. How should we preparing for the interview, the UPSC interview, which is so tough? Any thoughts on that?
So it may be slightly longish answer, but if time permits, I could. So firstly, one question is, how long do you need to take to prepare for the civil service examination? It's almost like Abhimanyu that it is never too early to start preparing for civil service examination, even if it is not a conscious preparation. If you are in school and you are doing your general knowledge, reading your paper diligently and being aware of the things around you, and even if you're interested in science and maths, you are not dumping the history and geography books. I think that is a part of the preparation that really goes without saying. For instance, someone asked Abraham Lincoln after his famous Gettysburg Address, they said, it's a recorded history, that, sir, how long had you been preparing for this address? Was it an extempore? Did you prepare it overnight? Did it take a week's time? He said, I was preparing for this for the whole of my life. So literally, civil service examination or any endeavor, whether you want to get into academia, into politics, into whatever, you literally, once you have that focus clear, you are, if not obsessed with it, but at least you have a kind of a guiding northern star that this is where I want to head. So it's never too early. There's nothing like too early. On the other side, too late, I think, with the type of expanse in syllabus, the depth, extensive and intensive, of course, the systems change each year, and I may not be too, keyed up or updated on those. But I think 1 year, year and a half, that is the type of full focus. And when I say focus, it means absolutely lack of distractions. You can't have a part-time job, in my opinion. If you are preparing for civil services, okay, you've done your master's in a particular thing. Now, take a sabbatical for 1 year and full focus and concentration, and like Arjun, seeing nothing but the eye of the fish. That's what. And some questions which people ask is, what then after 3 attempts I do not get in? After all, everyone may not be able to join. Let me tell you that even if you do not ultimately join civil service, if you have been preparing yourself diligently, that time is not a time which is lost in life. That is an investment in your self-improvement. And anywhere in your career, whether you get into a corporate world, some other government job, your own business, in academics, that would stand you in good stead. Now, to answer Atulji's question on the interview, I think most important aspect in interview, there are two things. It is they're going to test your knowledge. They've tested your knowledge. They really want to see that, okay, generally you are aware. in this day and age, you know what COVID is, but they're not going to ask you to draw the DNA molecular diagram of the virus there. What is important is, A, are you able to justify your answers? I mean, should India have gone in for an open conflict with China? It's an open-ended question. It's an opinion they're asking. But whatever the answer you give, are you able to justify it? That is, A, I think, very important. B, the aspect is, are you consistent with your answers? For instance, I remember in my IS interview, they asked, about non-aligned policy and so on. At that time, Mrs. Gandhi had been hosting the NAM summit and so on, and there were power blocks and Soviet Union and USA on one side, so on and so forth. They said, what is India's policy and stand on the Russian intervention, Soviet intervention in Afghanistan? Afghanistan virtually had been occupied by Soviet Union. So I said, it's a kind of equivocal, and we are not very clear. And we say, we are against the intervention of any foreign power in any sovereign nation. We don't say that we condemn the Soviet occupation of the Afghanistan. So then they said, well, you also talked about those principles of non-aligned. Does this not, our foreign policy for Afghanistan does not, violate our commitment to the non-aligned principles? So I somewhere had read about an American ambassador's quote. I said, foreign policy, sir, is based on priorities and not principles. And the priority is to have a good relationship with a friend like Soviet Union. So the whole idea is to be consistent and be able to justify rather than a factual information. Factual information, Google uncle can answer all those questions, but can you, when those various data particles are flung at you, come out with an optimal solution? No one is looking at perfection. Perfection is the worst enemy of the very good. A very good optimal solution which works is much better than a perfect utopian solution which is not able to take off the drawing board.
So true. Vivek, we speak a lot about this topic, and what I learned from Mr. Sidhu is three things actually today. One is read a lot. So because the questions that you get could be from any sphere, you just don't know where they're coming from. So read a lot. I think you talked about passion, and there's a very famous quote by Simon Sinek. He says that when you work, and if it's someone else telling you to work, it becomes a lot of drudgery and hard work. But when you work for yourself and you like what you're doing, it becomes passion. So I think we need to bring passion into the preparation. And it's not just about UPSC. I think you're saying it's about life, Mr. Sidhu.
Life in general, and I think it was Maya Angelou who's recently, the Black American lady died recently, nearly 100 years. She said it's the balance between, passion and patience. And you can even add perseverance to that. So it's a balance. No one has that much energy to keep on being passionate throughout. And if you are being too patient, you may lose a lifetime being patient. So the balance between passion and patience, and passionate about the things which you really love doing. You don't get tired doing the thing which you love. And of course, knowing when to be patient. If the Pandavas were in exile for 12 years, they needed to be patient. But when time for action came at the Battle of the Mahabharata at Kurukshetra, then there was nothing but action. So balance and then timing where what should come to the fore.
So I'm tempted to ask one question to you, Vivek, because I have a very specific point of view on this. While there are 6 attempts which are there for the UPSC, my belief is that max 3 attempts, ideally 2 attempts. If you don't really make it by the 3rd attempt, it's very unlikely you'll have the tenacity to move ahead. But what's your thought? Typically, how many attempts should one take? Until when should we wait, keep on appearing for the exam?
I think I agree with Mr. Sidhu, and he said 3 attempts. He did mention, supposing you have spent 3 years and you don't get in, then also you have added value to your life. You have learned so much. You are prepared for any other endeavor in your life. And also I'd like to add that when he says that you have to dedicate 1 year or 1.5 years to the cause, that is absolutely true. But beyond that, nobody can sit for 3 years without working at the prime of your life. And so a part-time job after 1.5 years is perfectly justified. You can go for your second and third attempts, but dedicate 1 year for the task of UPSC at least. If you do reasonably well, or if you feel you stand a chance, go in for the second and third attempts with vigor, with energy, with more reading and enthusiasm, but also prepare for plan B. You have to be prepared for your career, I think. And more than 3 attempts, personally, I don't advocate. We have a lot of queries in our academy, also people coming in. But if, 6 attempts, I would not advise anyone to take. It's your individual preference.
I think I've seen some of my friends preparing, so support from the right sort of coaches really helps. So find the right institution to get coached from. I think that's very important for the UPSC aspirants. And I think that's pretty much true for everything in life also. Finding a good coach.
That's really very important.
Becomes very important.
There is so much of fuzziness around this, and so many different things which people will tell you. Someone will say, you need to have a group study. Someone say, you first prepare for the optional and, specialize in that. Someone will say, get the general studies out of the way and so on and so forth. So if you are taking too much of advice from too many quarters, all you're going to get confused. You should know what's your own internal resonant frequency. And then within that, one or two people who've been there, done that, take their views. Because a good mentor or a guru will actually show you the various alternatives, and then you got to choose the path yourself, because you're the one who's going to touch that path. And therefore, a good guidance at the right time, in the right manner, that is very important. Otherwise, there are very many quacks around who can give you advice with, and those, time and money would be wasted. So you have to avoid those and come to people who have a track record, have integrity, have a standing, and are dedicated for the cause. I mean, they are interested that, people from my area, my state, my country should come forth. We're impassioned to empower the youngsters.
Atul, I'll just add one more point. I totally agree. Once again, I think Mr. Sidhu sir has been so inspiring in this session all through. So many nuggets of wisdom. But I would also add that, the state civil services, if you're not coming into the UPSC and somehow you're not able to crack it, even the state civil service is a good option. I have been in the Haryana civil service, got promoted to IAS after 19 years, remained in my home state throughout, and did not have to go to another state. And it is also an option where if you are prepared for the UPSC exam, then appearing for the state civil services exam naturally becomes a little easier. There may be a little modification. There are still all two options in the state civil services, whereas there is one in the UPSC. But you must try for the state service also. It is a very good step ladder to get into the IAS, and even a very fulfilling career in the state service awaits.
And I counsel a lot of students, Sidhu sir. My sense is when the bar is UPSC, when you start preparing for UPSC, even if you don't make it to the UPSC because there's such limited number of seats and the competition is so high, there's so many other services. You can really, really crack life, like you rightly said. The defense services are there, the state services are there, the bank services are there. There's so many other services that one can really get into. So it's really worthwhile preparing for the UPSC if joining the government is what students want to do. So that's, I think, the learning that we're also having. There is one political question which is there. I'll leave it to you whether you want to answer that, Mr. Sidhu, or not. But I'm tempted to ask this question. The question is, and that's actually one of our teacher friends who's asking this, that despite all the protection, why couldn't we save Mr. Beyant Singh, and why did he have to die? I think that's a question. I don't know whether you'd like to answer that or not.
I think it's not a political question. It is more of a security question. And with the wisdom of hindsight, which is always 20/20, I think 2 or 3 things in my personal opinion. It's an opinion. It's definitely not the official finding or an official line. Is somewhere around 1994, we thought, we have really conquered terrorism and it's back to normal. And therefore, somewhere down the line, we got a little complacent. just like in COVID, the first wave, you thought you conquered it, then you suddenly have a second wave. The other was that somewhere the dual responsibility, that who would be responsible for the security of the chief minister when he's in Chandigarh, especially when he's in and around the secretariat. So the Central Industrial Security Force that you have now actually came into place after the assassination, the unfortunate assassination on 31st of August 1995. Otherwise, Punjab police, they were guarding their side of it, and the Haryana police were guarding their part of it, and the back parameter, etc., and so on, where you have no barbed wires. Those were just not there. And I remember, as an additional deputy commissioner in a private Maruti car, driving all the way with my I-card right up to the VIP porch and then walking in. So I think it was a serious security lapse, and whether anyone was held accountable for that or not, that's entirely a different story. So it was not about political interference. It was basically a security lapse where there were overlapping jurisdictions, and therefore the responsibility was not very clearly defined. So this becomes important. The lessons to be drawn from there become important as to when things are like this, we should be very clear as to who's responsible, and the person who's responsible must have the authority and the resources to enforce that responsibility. We normally have, this thing, for instance, happened to me. You're posted as the founder, additional deputy commissioner Batala, in charge of the, district magistrate, police district Batala. But neither the local SDM is reporting to you, the deputy commissioner sitting somewhere is thinking that you're going to carve out your Indraprastha out of the Khandava Prastha or whatever. And the local SSP, of course, who would say, why has this, Kalka Ladka come and sat on top of me? So when you give responsibility, clear-cut responsibility, but authority and resources to enforce that.
I think that's true for pretty much everything, and it's a great learning for all of us. And I think so well said, Mr. Sidhu, that accountability, there has to be a clear captain of a team, and the accountability and responsibility has to be clear-cut. So, I mean, what a beautiful answer to a...
We talk in terms of, civil services, civil servants being accountable. So it's actually a continuum. What is accountability, responsibility, and culpability? For instance, responsibility, if there is an air crash, the civil aviation minister or the railway minister, if there is a rail accident, may choose to resign. He owns up the moral responsibility. That's entirely a personal decision. Of course, if the gate man was sleeping, the railway minister cannot be held in that sense. The accountability is where a specific duty was assigned to you, and there was a dereliction in the performance of that duty. Either sheer incompetence or you slept over it. So somewhere in the continuum, there's accountability. And the culpability is where there is a criminality in your mind when you're doing something. There's a personal gain to be had. So when we talk in terms of fixing accountability, we often say in government, fix accountability. So we have to see on this spectrum, is it a responsibility, accountability, culpability, and then, take the decision accordingly.
So beautifully said. There's one last question, Vivek. We're coming to an end. I think we've short over time. It's been such an enriching and engaging discussion. So I'll leave it to you whether you want to ask Dr. Rana's question. I think it might take time, but Vivek, I'll leave it to you to close.
I would just mention the question and maybe we can send the answer. In fact, Dr. Vivek Rana is a faculty at our Vivek IAS Career Academy. So, sir, maybe quick 2 points. He's asking what changes should the bureaucracy make in order to prepare itself for the challenges of the 21st century? 2 changes that you suggest, although it's a long answer, I guess, but maybe as quickly as possible.
I'll give a short answer. I mean, there's whole debate between generalists and specialists and, the IS people and other civil services competing to be joint secretaries and then specialists being there. I think a civil servant in the modern times, the COVID era, the post-COVID era, he has to be a kind of a person who knows more and more about more and more. Normally, we say the civil servant knows less and less about more and more, and a specialist knows, less and less, more and more about less and less. So what I think civil servant needs to do is have a working knowledge of the various aspects, and then to be able to weave them together within a constitutional framework, in a political environment, what is acceptable to the people, and resources available to you. I mean, I could have a solution for COVID which requires 3 times the budgetary allocation which state of Punjab has. So it is by definition a non-starter. So civil servants are going to be required to be more innovative in solutions. The blueprint approach is not going to run. People are looking not for the processes, they're looking for the outcomes. You can't say, well, I meticulously complied with the budget manual, but if at the end of the day, when you end up with a bankrupt treasury, no one is going to give you Padma Shri for having complied with the budget manual. So therefore, a pragmatic civil servant who is able to have a course correction, talk to all stakeholders, and take them along, that is going to be more and more important. And I think, especially at the cutting edge level, and you talk to the state civil services, the sub-divisional magistrates, the city magistrates, the executive magistrates, they are really the backbone of the deputy commissioner. And I do remember, asking one question to a divisional commissioner as an under training officer. I said, sir, was your deputy commissioner at A better than deputy commissioner at B? So I personally would have thought that the answer by default would be A. He said B, because if you see the type of sub-divisional magistrates he's working with and normalize and rationalize, you'll automatically get the answer. So I think you have to, as civil servants, be involved and be innovative. The COVID things we really learned on the job, and there were no manuals, and instructions were coming and getting revised. So we, as civil servants at every level, including the policy level, including at the cutting edge level, to the Patwari level, who were, performing cremations of, COVID positive patients where the, immediate family members were not willing to touch. So, and the leadership which actually, impelled them or inspired them to take up that job. So I think, if anything, the crisis and the challenges of this century will only show that civil service is more relevant than ever before, and steel frame in a positive sense rather than a rusty, creaking steel frame that we often write or read in academic articles.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Very good answer. Just close. So thank you very much, sir. I think you were absolutely superb in your assessment of the civil service and your responses. Very inspiring and always something to learn from you. I'm sure as students and potential students of Shoolini University and Vivek IAS Career Academy will be benefited and will keep in touch with us so that they can learn more. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and I wish you, your institutions and your endeavors and all the students the very best. And should there be anything which I can personally or professionally contribute, please don't hesitate individually or collectively to get in touch with me. Thank you.
I think before we call it a day, I would again thank Mr. Sidhu, Vivek Atre, the Vivek Career Academy, everyone who joined, the students. So there were more than 500 views today, sir. It's been very inspiring, and I so wish I'd heard you 30 years back. Who knows? I could have been in the services. But anyway, lovely, lovely day, sir, to you and to all the participants. Be safe and have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Atul.